so that's Mr. Owens' deal.
You should have,
Click on the participants.
it's up in the top right here.
Oh, gallery.
Gallery.
All right. Cool. Okay.
Is that, I mean,
I feel old because I can't figure this stuff out nowadays.
Yeah, you know, it,
well, we can't do anything about those doors.
I kind of.
What about that window, is that?
Figuring it
It's not
out
bugging,
sort of
it
as
might
I
bug you
go.
eventually, so.
I had never used.
I'll put it down.
And I don't use it at, you know, I work in a store, I don't work online, so.
Yeah. No, same for me, I'm driving a truck all day, I'm not on a computer.
Hey, Mr. Bray, can you just unmute for a second and just say testing so we make sure we got your audio?
Yep, I'm here.
All right, good. We can hear you. All right, folks, we're gonna give, just since we moved locations at kind of a late hour, I know that we have most of our commissioners here, but I want to give an opportunity for anybody in the public that's trying to find us, so if you'll just give us a couple more minutes to let any people that are trying to find us get here to the library. We'll call the meeting order in just a couple of minutes if you have a chance to find us. Anybody else that is needing to be admitted to the meeting?
I don't see anybody at this time.
Okay.
I like how you ID the whole fence.
Well, unfortunately, fencing is an issue in the city.
Well,
I'm gonna seek to add another thing about fences too here shortly.
well, you know what I told him, because he was telling me, you know, it was, I said,
Oh, your next door neighbor.
yeah, and I said, listen, I said, go see if you can get a variance. That's all I can say. You may have to go before the DDA, I don't know.
Well, so ironically, the section that's along your property line is not a legal fence.
I know.
Yeah. But I also decided not to make them take it down
I
because it would, you know, cost versus benefit, I guess. But, you know, I've got probably a dozen fence issues going on right now.
Oh, jeez.
Now that Mrs. Powell's here, I can start, right?
No, I was just trying to figure out if they're considered part of the same household, that they could sit within 6 feet of each other. So that's a no.
This is close enough.
Still didn't bring cookies, did you?
No.
I look for you to bring cookies every time.
One of these days.
Well, that's it, that's an incentive for you to be here.
Right? I know.
Too hot to bake.
Sure.
You take a nice 2-month-long vacation.
All right, well, I think we will go ahead and call this meeting to order. So we could, we have a flag for those of you in the room over here. We will rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Owens, I know you can't see it, but I was looking at that one, and I was like, why is everybody looking over this way?
Oh, well.
All right, so I just since we're kind of doing a blended meeting here, for those of you that are in the room, if you could make sure that your Zoom is muted until you're gonna say something, because otherwise with these computers in close proximity, we'll get some feedback going on. So just make sure that when you're ready to vote on something or make a comment, then unmute at that point. For those of you at home, I don't think that that's as much of an issue unless you hear it start reverberating, then you can hit the mute there. So again, let me just remind you, just in the kind of where this blended meeting, where we've got half of our commissioners here and half online. if you could, especially those of you that are online, when we're voting on something, if you could not only vote verbally with a yes or no, but also give me either a thumbs up or a thumbs down in case we're having audio issues, so that way I can be able to verify that with everybody. We'll make sure that we get the votes recorded correctly that way. So our roll call for this evening, Mr. Bray.
Here.
Mrs. Brimmer.
Here.
Mr. Conley.
Here.
Mr. Hall is excused this evening, as well as Mr. McGrath. Mr. Nixon.
Here.
Harrison Owens.
Here.
Mr. Watson.
Here.
And Craig Owens is here. We have Mr. Womack, our city manager, Mr. Johnson, our city planner, and Chandel Navarowski is here. Kind of doing double duty today, because Ms. Johnson is, understand she can't be here because of a baby thing going on or something, but I guess we'll excuse her for this evening. So if you would turn your attention, please, to the minutes from our June 2nd meeting. I would make a motion to approve those minutes with one minor correction that I saw under number 14, adjournment. Harrison Owens, the S was left off the end of his name on those minutes. But I will make that motion that we approve those minutes with that one minor correction. Is there support for that? Yes, we have support for Mrs. Brimmer. Anybody else see anything in the minutes that needs to be addressed? Okay. All right, all in favor of approving those minutes with that minor correction, aye?
Aye.
All opposed, no? Okay, motion carries, thank you. Mhm. All right, one technological pause here.
You might also want to unmute your video so they can see.
Yeah, but I can see.
What do you need me to do?
Right, so.
You mouse down the bottom here, you click start video right there.
So
I noticed that your tile was showing up.
All right.
For those of us that aren't here.
Okay, our agenda for this evening, is there a motion to approve that agenda?
Motion to approve that.
Okay, Harrison Owens moved for,
I'll second.
and Mrs. Bremer supported.
Mr. Owens, before we move forward, I would like to ask the board if they'd like to add an item, and that would be, I guess, how about 11D? Let's add an 11D, which would be corrugated metal fences and whether those are considered agricultural fencing.
Do you want that under staff comments?
I guess open discussion for issues not on the agenda.
Okay. So 11D as in David. Mr. Womack, could you, I need to be able to unmute myself, and that's your,
I have allow participants to unmute themselves.
mine says the host is not allowing participants to unmute. When I click on unmute.
Okay, go ahead and try that.
Mr. Womack was keeping me out, so.
My
All right,
apologies.
so, just, Harrison, since you, motion to approve the agenda, would you like to
Yeah,
modify
so-
your motion?
I will, motion to approve the agenda with the addition from Mr. Womack.
Okay. Okay, and Mrs. Bremer has renewed her support for that. Anybody else see anything on the agenda that needs to be addressed? Okay, all in favor of approving that agenda with that change, adding 11D, aye?
Aye.
All opposed, no? Okay, motion carries. All right, public comments. Let's start with those that are here in the room with us. Any comments from our esteemed guests?
Not I.
Okay, and Mr. Womack, anybody online? Or
I don't believe so. Believe everybody, John Guest. Is that you, John Guest? Okay, so I guess I have a John listed as a guest. I'll ask to unmute.
Oh, that would be me.
Okay. In that case, I have no members of the public waiting online.
Okay. Mr. Womack, I just had a comment from Mr. Watson that he also cannot unmute himself if he wants to make a comment.
Let's see, can he ask to unmute?
Okay. Good. All right, so public comments are closed since we don't have anybody there. Folks, any conflicts of interest or ex parte communications that you need to report to the body? All right. Do not see anything from anybody. We have no scheduled public hearings this evening, so we'll move to new business. Item A, front yard fences. If in your packet, if you would like to look at some of the information on there, it begins on page 9 on your packet. And Mr. Womack has put together for us a memo on this. I guess I'd like to ask the board, because Mr. Womack said his memo indicating a few different ways we could go about this. If the planning commission wants to address that, so I guess maybe let's, before we get into going through the very well-written memo, is this something that we want to dig into a little bit further? Mrs. Brimmer, can you make sure that you unmute? Okay, you are.
We already have an ordinance in place, and I think that Mr. Womack should merely enforce the existing law.
If I could chime in.
Yes.
I think it's worth at least looking at in a cursory way. I think there's a lot of laws we have on the books that haven't been looked at in a long time, and I think if there's a lot of issues coming up, it wouldn't hurt to at least go over it quickly and see if there's anything we think needs to be changed in the current ordinances.
Mr. Brimmer?
I agree, there are some things that need to be looked at in the fence ordinance, but I think I'd like to have Mr. Womack go through the entire thing and come back with some suggestions on different things that we need to do.
So if I may, we're not gonna throw a Band-Aid on what's a big problem. I think it's appropriate for us to take a look at the whole ordinance. As I indicated before, I wanted to add an 11D, because we do have ongoing issues with other aspects of the fence ordinance as well. So I want this to be put in front of the planning commission to at least acknowledge, understand that there is a potential problem. And that, next month when I have more time, I'll write the next series of, here's the problem with the fence ordinance. So I don't know if I need any action at this time regarding this, other than, hey, let's continue to work on it, and I do or don't like this aspect of it. But you can also stay on mute until we get more into it, and eventually I'll have to come up with a complete ordinance, and at that time you guys can vote to recommend.
All right, so, commissioners, what's your pleasure? Would you want to start going through this? Do you want to get some feedback, some preliminary feedback on this now? Wait until you have more complete information? How would you like to proceed? Swanson?
I agree with Ms. Bremer. I would also like to have more information than what we have before making decisions about this.
Anybody else have any thoughts? All right, so, get the sense that, we should, we'll wait on this for a little bit, so, I, will, make the motion that we, table this discussion until we have more information to consider.
I'll second that.
There's support from Mrs. Brimmer. Any further discussion on that? Okay, all in favor of the motion to table, aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Okay, we will table that one. All right. Letter B under new business, medical marijuana, in your packet, that is page 15. Where we find that information.
So if I could,
Yes.
sorry, I have to unmute myself. So if I could, Mr. Owens, I wanted to just kind of tell you what's going on here. Obviously, the city just went through a very laborious process of approving a recreational marijuana ordinance. However, there is some discussion about potentially also adding a medical component. I just don't know what it is yet. I don't even know what the discussion is going to be because unfortunately I have not received any marching orders from the city council. So city council will meet in 2 days. I guess my recommendation would be to table this issue as well. Allow them to give me marching orders and we can come back in, what's next month, August? And we can start talking at that point about what we want to do.
Okay. Any other discussion on that? Any thoughts? Mr. Owens?
I agree with Mr. Womack's recommendation. I don't think that there's any point in us looking further into this when we don't even know which direction city council is gonna go. We might start some work that they, completely go the other way on, and then all of our hard work would be lost. So I think we should just wait until we know more what they're looking and which direction they're leaning.
Okay. Mr. Rubber?
I agree.
All right. Any other thoughts on that? All right, so again, kind of getting the sense of the planning commission, I will make a motion that we table this discussion until we get some direction, until Mr. Womack gets some direction from the city council.
I'll second that.
Support. Okay. All right, all in favor of tabling that one, aye?
Aye.
All opposed, no?
Should be the next.
Okay, I bet both Mr. Watson and Mr. Owens were second, so everyone put in there. All right, item C, under new business, non-conforming ordinance draft, page 16 in your packet. And we have, there's a couple of them there, if you scroll down, because one of them has some comments that have been added to it. As you go through there. Mr. Womack, anything that you want to especially highlight on this?
Yep, so again, I hate to keep doing this to you guys, but I'm not sure we're ready to really proceed on this. This is a complicated subject. I'm not sure how well versed Mr. Johnson has been in the proposal that the city attorney put together for us. But this has some pretty far-reaching consequences either way we go with it. So I would like each member to study in depth. Also give me some more time to study it in depth. This is one of the few ordinances that I did not write myself. So I'd like to take another month and kind of see the, potential long-term consequences of everything. Unfortunately, I've just been absolutely swamped with one particular thing over the last couple of months. So Yeah, I would ask that each member review it and be prepared for more in-depth discussion next month.
I, just for what it's worth, I did like, I think it was on the version that had the notes on there, the language of when something's cannot be reconstructed or repaired, instead of bringing it into, that wording about bringing it into compliance with chapter 40, making it very specific what we're bringing, want them to line up with. But, yeah, I agree that this one is, as we already know, because we had several citizens that came and talked to us several months ago, and very strong feelings on this both ways, so we want to make sure that we get something really good in front of people. So, yes, Ms. Berman?
I did have a question. With this ordinance, would it mean that when a building that was originally a single family that's been transformed into a multifamily, would that go back to a single family residence if it were sold?
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons I want to take a much more in-depth look at it, is that was the original intent, and that was part of the discussions that I had with the city attorney who drafted this ordinance. Because as you guys all know, one of the major problems we have are people who've converted single-family residential homes into multifamily residences. I don't think they ever had legal authority to do that, and I believe that those homes are almost certainly illegal non-conforming. So my understanding, and this is why I want to reread it, is that the first option basically says, we don't care what happened, it's illegal non-conforming, therefore you gotta stop it and convert it back to single-family residential. The second option is a softer approach, and it's saying, well, okay, if it's a residential building, we'll allow you to rebuild it. What I am not 100% sure on is the difference between illegal and legal non-conforming between those two. So that's why I want to take the extra month and reread it and make notes and all the other nice things. But yes, that is one of the major goals of this ordinance change.
And that was something that I didn't understand. I reread it, and I didn't exactly know where it was going, so. Thank you.
Anybody else have any comments or thoughts on this? All right, so, once again, I will make the motion that we table this until we have some more information to be able to consider.
I'll second.
Support from Mrs. Bremer. Any other discussion on this? All in favor of tabling item C, non-conforming ordinance draft, aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Okay, motion carries, thank you. All right, page 26 in your packet, letter D on our agenda, the 2020 special land use form update. Mr. Womack, you're just looking for any input from us?
Yep, so this is one of those forms that I had not touched since 2016. Since I got here, this was put together by previous administration, I think in 2014. I thought it was very poorly worded back in 2014, and we certainly were not getting the answers I think we were looking for through the special land use. So I did try to word them a little differently, so that people are kind of more forced to think about how their project is going to affect these things. And frankly, since all marijuana businesses are going to be special land uses, I think it's an appropriate time to start holding people's feet to the fire in these answers. So also as zoning administrator, it's part of my decision moving forward to make sure that they're answering these questions. But yet, I present to the Planning Commission mostly for additional eyes to look at it, see if it makes sense to you, see if there's any problems with it. I will tell you that this is now one draft older than what's on my computer. I did make a couple minor changes. But for the most part, I think it's a step in the right direction. But I'm happy for any comments or feedback.
Only suggestion that I would propose is, under number 6, letter E. I'm assuming, as the question's written right now, the answer would have to be yes, so I guess I would suggest that the question be more like, how will the establishment maintain the negative air pressure, instead of will they, because I think that they have to, right, for the control purposes.
Yeah, so, sorry. Oh, that's not working. Sorry. So you're absolutely correct. Some of these are very much so yes, no questions, because that's what's required under the ordinance. I guess I was thinking that the how would come as a different part of the, the multitudinous amount of work that they're gonna put into this. But you're probably right that it's probably better to ask that it's required, therefore how will you do it? So maybe I'll make that a multi-part, will you and how are you going to, or something to that effect.
Mr. Craig,
Yes.
I thought, 6D, I thought that was the how.
Right, I think he was muted for those people at 6D.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, that could be, I don't know, will the negative air pressure take care of all of the things listed in item D?
So yeah, that's a good point. So those are kind of two different things. The odor control is obviously a huge part of these businesses, which is why that question is asked in multiple locations in several different ways. But the ordinance does, and this is obviously where it came from, it obviously does require negative air pressure in addition to the odor control.
Oh, okay.
So I think you're right that the the negative air pressure is going to affect the odor control, but it was written in there specifically as a separate question.
Oh,
So if that makes sense, I'll still look at the language and try to improve upon it, but
Mrs. Berman?
There was one area in here where it listed a fee of $5,000, and the rest of them were just X's. Was that a legitimate fee? And I left my other note at home, I can't tell you where it was.
yeah, so under the state law, you can charge up to a maximum of $5,000 per license. But upon reviewing the ordinances, it looks like the way we wrote it, and this wasn't intentional, it's just how the attorney did it, was that there's two separate fees. One is an application fee, one is a license fee. Well, my understanding is you can't charge more than $5,000 altogether. You can't call one fee one thing and one another and charge double the amount. So in the most updated draft, which you guys have not seen, those X's are replaced with $2,000 and $3,000 to be $5,000 total.
Okay. Thank you.
I just thought the X's were to be determined later.
I did too, but then I saw the one that was,
Well,
listed, so I wasn't-
they were to be determined later, and then I made a determination.
Right. Anybody else have any comments, suggestions, things that you spotted on this form that you'd like to clarify or maybe see added, something that wasn't on there that needs to be on there? Okay. So I don't see anything else. So, all right, so you've got.
You got, Clinton on there, raising his hand.
Oh, sorry. Yep.
There's a spot in here, page 4 of the application, where it says incomplete applications deleted or rejected or delayed. Sometimes the zoning administrator feels that the application is sufficiently appropriately. I didn't know if there was a better way to say that other than feels.
Okay.
Determined, something like that. It's a minor thing, but it seems arbitrary.
I'm open to suggestions.
Anybody
I'm open to suggestions about how to fix that.
A good wordsmith?
I would use determines over feels, but there's other ways to do it.
Okay. Determines, do you like that word?
Determines is fine by me, I'll make that change, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Conlon.
To be fair to the city administrator, that was done at midnight, so wordsmithing was okay for midnight.
All right. All right. So, I guess I kind of lumped them together there, but, item E is specifically for the marijuana establishment application, so just, anybody see anything on that part of that? We kind of jumped into that form a little bit while we were talking about just the special land use. So, kind of combined D and E together there on our agenda, but anybody see anything else on that form? Okay, so I think that covers both D and E there for that part of that form. All right, letter F under new business, the Downtown Development Authority has a mural that they have proposed, page 41 in your packet. And as Mr. Womack explained to us, we don't necessarily, it's sign versus mural, what we're trying to clarify. So, what would you like from us, which,
Yeah, so this is one of those kind of strange things that's kind of just stuck around in our sign ordinance. It was under the old sign ordinance, it's on the new sign ordinance. I suspect it was designed to kind of capture anybody who was thinking that they would just paint a giant sign on the side of their building to get out of the sign, so they could have whatever size that they wanted. So I suspect that's probably why it was originally drafted, that the planning commission would review all murals. But again, it was poorly worded originally. So, I'm just looking for a little direction whether the planning commission thinks that a mural that is purely artistic needs to be approved of by the planning commission, or whether they would say that that's not a sign at all and leave it, I guess, to administration to make that call.
Ms. Brewer?
I looked up the definition of sign, and in part it says, quote, graphics that bring attention to general public. So, that's not necessarily related to the theme of the business, so it would be considered a sign. But, as far as the size, that is supposed to be, okayed by the planning commission. I would think that some sort of oversight on art that's put on our buildings would be a good idea. You never know what art is gonna come up with, and we don't want it to negatively reflect on our community.
Well, I'm not entirely sure that the planning commission should be the art critics of the city, but I believe that the definition of sign indicates that it needs to be advertising for a business. I don't know what a purely artistic mural might be advertising for. So if this mural were to say, come shop at, the 5-star Ensley office, that's clearly a sign at that point. But if it's just gonna be a couple of lumberjacks, I don't know how that has any advertising for any business in town. So I just don't know if it meets the definition of sign.
Did you read the sign definition?
I did.
It said graphics that bring attention to the general public. It didn't necessarily mean advertising for that business. Which is, something that the planning commission is supposed to look at if it's a sign.
Well, I'll have to look at
Especially
it.
if it's that big.
I'll have to look at it in context here, but I thought there was more to it than that.
Well, there is more to it, the definition, but part of it was that part that included, I would say, murals. And then it does say that, the planning commission has to decide if the mural enhances the architecture of the building if it is greater than 12 square feet. So that's where I was coming from.
How big is this sign that is proposed?
Sorry, my computer's doing a thing. It's gonna take up the larger, a large part of the upper half of the side of that building. I don't have an exact square footage. It's probably 300-ish square feet. So I'm looking at the sign ordinance, and a mural or painted wall means a design or representation which is painted or drawn on the exterior surface of a structure. Design or representation. It doesn't say it's a sign. Then, further along, the definition of sign means any device, structure, fixture, figure, symbol, banner, I'll just go et cetera, designed for the purpose of conveying, bringing attention to, identifying, or advertising an establishment, product, goods, services, or other message to the general public. I don't know if this mural, if you want to consider it a sign, is bringing attention to, identifying, or advertising an establishment, product, goods, services, or other message to the general public. So I guess, Ms. Bremer, I would ask you, which establishment, product, goods, services, or other message to the general public is being conveyed by this mural?
The other message that I saw was that it was promoting Cedar Springs, which is a good thing. I'm not arguing that it shouldn't be there. I'm just saying that according to the sign ordinance, if it's larger than 12 square feet, then the planning commission is supposed to look at it. Mr. Johnson?
Well, this is one of those situations where the zoning administrator would make a decision as to whether or not what is being presented on the wall is a mural, and then does it meet the definition of a sign. So I think it's up to the zoning administrator to make that decision first. And if he decides, or she decides that it falls into the realm of the planning commission, then it should be brought to the planning commission.
Okay, let me just, for those of you that are online, because Mr. Johnson's not sitting right in front of the computer, let me see if I accurately sum up, and you tell me if I did. He said that the zoning administrator can make the decision if it meets the definition of a sign or a mural, and if it does meet, according to the zoning administrator, the definition of a mural, then it would come to the planning commission. Is that accurate, Mr. Johnson?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Mr. Watson, you hit unmute, and then share what you would like to say.
Well, I was just gonna, when I get the wording of the definition of a sign, I would think that a mural such as this doesn't qualify, because as the word states, it's not advertising for any particular establishment or business. It feels more like a nod toward like the history of Cedar Springs, kind of like a historical painting, you know what I'm saying?
Well, I kind of like that, what Mr. Johnson said, that if the zoning administrator feels like it's a sign, that would fall under his purview, and if it's a mural, then according to the definition of the mural, then that's over 12 square feet, then it would come to the planning commission. Mr. Owens.
I also agree with Mr. Johnson's assessment. I have no interest in being an art critic, and I certainly am not one now. So I think that if it's purely artistic, leave that up to the zoning administrator, and if they think that we need to take a look at it, I think that leave that as their decision. And,
Mr. Johnson, I don't know if Mr. Womack, if you can like slide the computer over towards Mr. Johnson so that maybe people online can hear him better.
One other thing that the ordinance says is that mural or painted wall signs in the B2 district, and then it says related to the theme of the business. And I think that's a critical phrase there, that if this particular mural is not related to the theme of the business or a business, it would not fall under the purview of the planning commission. If it was a restaurant and they were painting pictures of food on the wall, then I think that's a different category of regulation. But the fact that where it's going to be painted, and if that mural doesn't relate to the business that's in the building, then it really doesn't fall under your purview.
Mr. Watson.
I'm sorry, I feel like I hit, mixed messages here. So if it falls under the definition of mural, does it go to the zoning administrator or the planning commission? Because I feel like people keep saying one or the other.
Well, so what Mr. Johnson just read was under the section 543, murals or painted wall signs in the B2 district related to the theme of the business when painted on the side or the rear exterior surface. So if it's not related to the theme of the business, so that's what's determining whether the zoning administrator is looking at it or the planning commission is looking at it. So that, and would it be and size, or, so like if it wasn't related, but it was over the 12 square feet?
Well, if it's not related to the theme of the business, then I don't see where it's regulated at all. Other than that, because it's under the section of exemptions to permitting. So if it meets the definition of a mural, which is a painted sign, painted wall sign, and the zoning administrator decides it's not related to the theme of the business, it doesn't even need a permit. There are no regulations for it.
Ms. Bremer?
So then the zoning administrator would decide whether the mural was acceptable or not. So he
Not the
would be our
content,
critic.
not the content, but merely does it meet the definition of a mural? And if it does, then you go to the section that regulates murals, and that would be under exceptions to permitting.
If I could just jump in, so just my understanding of what's being said here. It sounds like the zoning administrator will make a decision whether what's being proposed is a mural or a sign. If the zoning administrator determines it's a mural, unrelated to the business or any business, then it stays with the zoning administrator for approval. If the zoning administrator determines it's a sign of some kind, then it comes to the planning commission for approval. Does that sound fair?
Yep, I think that's what the,
Yeah, or if the mural is a representation of a theme for the business that's in that building. For instance, again, if it's a restaurant, they're painting pictures of food on the side, then that would fall under a mural, but it also would then come under the 12 square foot regulation.
Okay,
Ms. Bremer?
my only concern is the content of a mural. Is there any oversight on that, or can a person just go up and paint whatever on their building, whatever picture they want, and there's no oversight? I mean, then it becomes graffiti if it's something that is not acceptable to the general public.
Right, well, that would again fall under the purview of the zoning administrator, and you'd have to apply some community standards as to what might be considered allowable and not.
So is that something that we need to put in the ordinance?
You know,
Or-
this is one of those things I think I'm going to go with Harrison on for the time being, and that is, even though I am an art critic, I'm not going to be one in this situation. I think if somebody puts up a lewd picture of some kind, we can address it through some other mechanism. Art is often in the eye of the beholder. So the DDA had a contract that they signed with the artist, and part of that contract was it can't be obscene, it can't be these things, it can't have whatever.
Okay.
The only situation I could see it being an issue is if the property owner themselves wanted to commission a mural of some kind, and then they would have to, I guess, say, I want a lewd mural on the side of my building, which, like I said, could be addressed in some other mechanism, but I don't see that happening. You'd have to be a pretty interesting business to want to do that.
Ms. Watson?
You said something, Mr. Owens,
I saw your hand up, so you were recognized. You may speak if you'd like to.
You're muted.
Oh. Hold on. Ms. Watson, you may address us if you'd like to.
I just wanted to say I agree with the general consensus that's going on here, like Mr. Womack and Mr. Owen says. I'm not an artist, I'm not an art critic, therefore I feel like it's best not left up to someone like me to judge on a mural unless it comes under verbiage of seeking a sign.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this? All right. So clear as mud, you know what to do next, right?
Thank you, everybody, appreciate that.
All right. Letter G, page 44 in your packet. If you'll recall, when we were addressing the ordinances for the marijuana businesses, one of the things is a prohibition if that not sharing a property line with a residence. And we have a proposed property that doesn't share a line, but it touches on a corner. So page 44 in your packet is a memo from our city manager that is addressing that line versus corner issue. So, Mr. Womack, I'll let you walk through a couple of thoughts on that.
Okay, thank you. So, again, I haven't spoke with Mr. Johnson about this. He might have some greater insight, but this just doesn't seem to be one of those things that was very well addressed in our zoning ordinance. So I did scour the zoning ordinance trying to find any mention of property corner versus property line, or what's the definition that would give us, the ability to kind of discern what's going on here. So there's really only, I guess, two things that I looked at, and that would be under section 40-5 lot lines. I found it interesting that subpart 2 there, in the case of an irregular or triangular shaped lot, a line at least 10 feet in length entirely within the lot, parallel to and maximum distance, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's interesting because it's indicating that, at least from my reading of it, that to be considered a lot line in this regard, it has to be at least 10 feet in length. Which, again, to my mind, says to be a property line, at least for the consideration of this ordinance here, it has to be 10 feet in length. And then further along, and of course, I wrote this ordinance, so I kind of saw it coming, is under the honeybee ordinance, which is section 8-74, see subpart 1, where I indicated that notice shall not be required for any properties that share a common corner point without footage along a common lot line. So that, you wouldn't have to send letters to people that you only share a property corner with. But, this is one of those things where I think it's appropriate for the planning commission to indicate now how they're going to interpret this. Unless, of course, Mr. Johnson has a magic 8 ball sitting over there with him. because it's potentially gonna come up, and I think marijuana businesses, or really any businesses that this might affect, should know ahead of time what the answer is going to be.
Well, could you slide your computer over toward Mr. Johnson so he could tell us about line versus corners?
Well, okay. Typically, you don't have this definition in your zoning ordinance, but many communities do, and it defines lot lines as the lines bounding a lot, that define the boundary of a lot. So I think any point on a lot line is a lot line, whether it's the corner, or it's 1 inch from the corner, or 5 inches from the corner. I don't think it makes any difference. It touches a lot line, and the intent is of that section is to make sure that any kind of use is not that close to the marijuana establishment. So I think the fact that it touches the corner means that it can't be there. It falls within the regulation of your marijuana ordinance. That's my opinion. You may want to get a legal opinion on that before you proceed, but that's my professional planning opinion.
Mr. Conley, I think I saw your hand up. Mr. Conley, was there something that you wanted to add?
I think your computer might be frozen.
Looks like everything's moving on my computer.
There he is.
Mr. Conley? Yeah.
Are you guys trying to get a hold of Mr. Conley?
I think he's typing a message.
Oh,
Frozen on my screen.
okay.
He just voted no on something?
I couldn't hear most of what Mr. Johnson said, so,
Okay,
yeah, I think there's considerable lag coming from your end, so I'm getting your, request far after the time you actually said it. But, if I have the floor, I'm not sure, but I'll continue talking until I can get at my point. I don't know what Mr. Johnson just said because I couldn't hear it. My only, point was that geometry told me that a point is a point. A corner is a point, and a line is, extension between 2 points. So just the definition of what a line and a corner, or what a line and a corner are, seems, or is what I'm looking for, self-evident.
okay. Well, Mr. Johnson basically said that the point is part of, any part of the line is the line. So, but he also made the suggestion that we might want to get legal input on that before we proceed further, which I think is probably a good idea. Mr. Watson? Mr. Watson, can you hear me? Doesn't look like it. Looks like he's staring off in space.
Okay, sorry, I'm also getting incredible amount of lag from you, so I wasn't sure if you were talking or not, but, I agree with Mr. Conley that a point is a point, a corner is not, in my idea of a definition, not the same as sharing a property line with, between two properties, so that's just my input.
Mr. Bremer?
I can. Can you hear me?
Good.
He's back.
Can you hear me? 1, 2, 1, 2. Did you hear what I said?
Yes.
Okay.
Mrs. Bremer?
I love technology.
Okay. and the lines come to those corners, so it's all part of your property. I think Mr. Johnson is right.
Also, I don't know whether if we need to consult an attorney or a mathematician, but, we probably should get somebody else's, input on that.
Well, it helps to look at what is the intent of the regulation,
Exactly.
and that really will help you make up your mind on this language.
Mr. Berman?
And what we wanted was to keep the marijuana businesses 500 feet from residential homes. And there is a residential home right there, within a stone's throw.
So, Mr. Womack, would you like to, are you gonna, send that to the city attorney or the city mathematician?
Well, I'm pretty sure the city mathematician is sitting on Fifth Street right now. So, I mean, at this point, it's kind of all theoretical. I've been approached about this. I've not, received an actual application of any kind. I indicated to that person and all people who've asked my opinion that all I can do is give an opinion and that the planning commission is the authority on this. So what I'll probably do is I'll speak with the attorney who helped me draft this ordinance, see if there's any case law on it. But I think ultimately it's just, it's a vote of the planning commission, how you guys are gonna come out on this one. But that's just my opinion.
Okay. All right, let's move to, under old business, our White Pine Trail overlay. Mr. Johnson has a memo for us, page 47 in your packet, dated April 14th, 2020. Mr. Johnson, is there anything on this that you'd like to go over, or do you want us to weigh in on anything? How'd you like to proceed?
Well, I'm looking for some feedback from you on this. Last time we talked about this was in February, and at that point in time, we talked about the purpose of it, where the boundaries of it, what uses would be permitted, and how to process development requests within the overlay zone. So you gave me some feedback at that time. I put it into this ordinance, and I guess I would like your feedback as to whether, first of all, in the purpose section, is this what you're trying to accomplish? Those purposes that are in there. I guess I'll stop there and ask you just to respond as I go through it.
I like the purpose statement, I think it captures it well.
Anybody else online have an opinion on that, or? Maybe they can't, it hasn't caught up to them yet, I don't know.
I can hear Mr. Johnson, there's just a lot of echoing and lagging coming from other sources, so it's hard to tell when people are talking or not. And also, I don't, have anything to add, and from what I've read, it actually all, it looks pretty accurate to how we were, what we were trying to accomplish back when we were, establishing all the businesses we wanted on the trail or not.
Okay, that's good feedback. Thank you.
What,
Mr. Nixon?
I have a question. Play with the button. So one question, Mr. Johnson, when I was looking at this, if there was, one thing that it says is, let me get back to it. Generally recognized retail businesses that supply commodities on the premises within a completely enclosed building. So, is there anything about like roach coaches that could pull up to the trail or anything?
What is a roach coach?
Food truck?
Food truck? That's not addressed in here?
The city has a completely separate
Okay.
ordinance on that.
And that'll still work within, trail and all that?
So the city's ordinance on mobile vending does indicate that they can vend from various public spots, I believe one of which is the staging area.
Okay.
But I will tell you, and I'm very disappointed by this, the few mobile vending units that have contacted the city said, "You want me to pay for that? No, I refuse." So we just simply haven't had any come.
Okay, well, the list of uses was taken mostly from the B2 zoning district, and the planning commission went through that very carefully, and it really gives a pretty broad array of uses that are permitted there. Now, keep in mind that this is an overlay zone, and it applies to lands that are zoned industrial that abut the trail between Elm Street and Church Street, on both sides of the trail. So all the underlying zoning districts, the industrial uses, they can continue to operate their industrial uses. And if they want to set aside a room or add on to their building for anything that's allowed in the overlay zone, then they get to do that. So it really allows quite a broad array of uses along the trail. That would include any special land uses that are listed in the draft here. And then the permitting procedures are really pretty simple, that if you have an existing use and they want to convert part of the building to the sale of, make it a restaurant or any other use that's listed there, they simply need a development permit from the zoning administrator. They don't have to come to the planning commission, which makes it a pretty easy way to go to do business. They would probably need a building permit, and they'd have to make sure that there's enough parking on site. Any new building would go through site plan review from the planning commission, and any special use permit would also come before the planning commission.
Mr. Herman?
The personal service establishments, does that include tattoo parlor? I thought we talked about that once before.
Tattoo parlors have been excluded from the B2 district, but they are permitted in the B3 district. I don't know where Mr. Johnson's language came from, but that was my understanding, as we excluded it from the B2 district.
So it would be excluded on the trail.
I don't know.
It's not specifically excluded, so I would say it's probably permitted because it would fall in with barber shop and that sort of thing. So if you want to specifically exclude it, we can do that.
Don't be all for that.
I personally think it gives off the wrong image, which is one of the reasons we excluded it from the B2 zone. But that's a call for the planning commission.
I think that's a good idea. We'll exclude that.
Yeah, I agree.
And then one other thing I'd bring to your attention on the first page, and I provided you a map in your packet, that most of the ordinance pertains to properties that abut the White Pine Trail, but there are a couple of exceptions that properties that are zoned industrial but don't abut the trail would be included in the overlay zone. And there's one parcel down there south of Beach Street that I pointed out in the packet. Do you want to include that in the overlay zone simply for consistency, because there are other properties that don't abut the trail, but I can't remember how we decided to include those, but we have a map that shows that we did, at least in draft form.
Mr. Johnson, what is on that property right now? Do you know?
The mill company.
Okay.
It's a large industrial building, and then there's a small parcel to the right of that there's a house there, but it's zoned industrial.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for increasing the amount of flexibility in this zone. It's one of those legacy problems that the city has. I don't think there's any city that voluntarily creates an industrial zone right smack dab in the middle of the city. So the more that we can do to convert that area to non-industrial use, I think is smart. We just recently made everything back to industrial, I think as an acceptance of that's how it is and that's what it is right now. The Carmen Aventini mixed use district, I think, was a failure, which is one of the reasons that we've kind of shied away from that. But I also don't want to exclude any business that might want to take one of these properties and convert it to a more commercial use. So I'd be in favor of adding more properties, not less properties.
Agreed.
Okay, we can add that. Okay, well, in terms of procedure, I can make the corrections that you provided me this evening, bring this back in ordinance format for your next meeting, and if you're comfortable with it at that time, you can set a public hearing, to consider this and see what the public thinks of it.
So, Mr. Johnson, just for, I guess, public hearing purposes, the last date to get a public hearing put together would be the 21st, I believe, of July. So if you're able to, let me know before that time.
Does the planning commission want to hold the hearing in August, or do you want to look at it one more time? I think that's what Mr. Womack was asking, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, if Mr. Johnson feels like he can get this, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm talking over somebody. If Mr. Johnson feels like he can get this into ordinance form by the 21st, we can do that. But I also don't think it's a big rush, so I guess it's up to the planning commission.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind having the ordinance sent to us with our regular packet for the next meeting, so we have a chance to look through it again, and then set the public hearing.
Okay.
After that.
Yeah. Keep in mind, you're changing the zoning map, so you would need to send notices to people within 300 feet.
Right.
So it takes a little more staff time to put that together.
And I understand the city manager's doing a couple of jobs now because he's shorthanded. So the city manager will be doing that.
Okay, well, we'll bring it back to you in ordinance format, give you one more shot at it next month. Okay, thank you for your comments.
Thank you for your work on this. It was good. All right. So, in your packet, there is under correspondence, there's a timeline for the new fire stations going in. And so we're looking at April of 2021 for the grand opening.
Substantial completion. I don't want to say grand opening because, these things never go exactly according to plan. And sometimes we like to wait a week or two until we have nicer weather to actually do a grand opening. But yeah, April 1st, substantial completion, and hopefully open to the public shortly thereafter.
Wonderful. All right. Mr. Womack, any other comments for us?
Only that I'm a little anxious right now. I don't know what's happening with my city clerk because I'm recording on the cell phone that we would normally be communicating. But hopefully everything goes off, fingers crossed, just fine. I think when I have to take minutes and notes, it gives me a greater appreciation for what she does on a regular basis. And of course, we continue to have problems with Zoom because we have so many people on one internet source here in this building, which obviously creates lag time for everybody. So it's not an ideal situation, but I did want to get started having meetings that were open to the public. So thank you, Ms. Powell, for justifying what I've done here. And I guess thank the other Ms. Bernadette for also showing up. But yeah, moving forward, I I obviously am wearing a mask. We did have masks available. We have hand sanitizer and table sanitizer available. I would ask that both members of the public and members of the board consider doing that in the future. I'm trying to take this very seriously, and I would ask that you guys do the same as well. Thank you.
And obviously, the city clerk does not have any comments at this point. So
Her comments might be, baby,
Not until Saturday.
all right, planning commissioners, any comments from you? Thank you for your patience as we work through some of the technology issues. We tucked in the letter D under open discussion when we approved our agenda for a discussion on corrugated fencing. Ms. Womack?
Yeah, so I'm not realizing it. Maybe we should have put this under new business, but you know, I'm really just looking for a little bit of advice and direction from the planning commission. So I received a notification from somebody. I'll say it that way. That there was an illegal fence that had been put up without a permit. Of course, permits are designed to help people identify what a legal fence is or not, so that they don't waste their time and money putting up something that is not permitted. As we talked about before, our fence ordinance is kind of out of date, and we do need to put a lot of work into it. But my concern regarding metal corrugated fencing is that under our ordinance, it does not specify really what is a permitted fence type or not. Let me bring it up here quickly and I can read it to the board. So this would be section 40-446 for those following along at home. So there's subsection C, which indicates that no person shall place, string, or maintain chicken wire, agricultural fencing, barbed wire, or razor wire as part of any fence or structure in any zoning district. Now, those with an eagle eye will notice that there is a Scrivener's error there. It actually says agricultural fencing barbed wire, but there should be a comma there, so agricultural fencing. And I guess my question is a corrugated metal fence considered an agricultural fence? Because the only other section of this ordinance that indicates what would really be permitted or not is whether the fence is opaque or see-through. Those are my words. I don't know if corrugated metal fence really is what the city is going for. It's not a traditional fence material, and I think it might be an agricultural fence. So I guess I'm looking for a little direction about whether that's something the city wants to have being erected here in the city. Mr. Nixon, you had your hand up?
Yeah, when you say corrugated, you mean, sheet tin?
I mean, that's what it looks like to me. But I haven't felt the material. I don't know exactly what it is. And of course, there are other sections of this ordinance that may apply at some point. For example, fences shall be installed in a workmanlike manner. I only drove past this fence today. I then asked the code enforcement officer to go out and take pictures of it. It's apparent from the road that it was sloppily put up. And then it also, our ordinance also indicates it needs to stay in a state of good repair, et cetera, et cetera. Well, and rust resistant. I've seen a lot of these corrugated fences that rust very quickly and very badly. So that may also be a consideration for the fence itself. And the person didn't pull a permit. But I'm just looking for, I guess, definitionally, whether that would be considered agricultural fencing or not.
No, sheet tin, the only place I've ever seen sheet tin used are scrap yards. That's the only place sheet 10 is ever put up. You don't put up sheet, sheet 10 to keep in any animals, to keep out animals. It's not a normal fencing material unless you're doing a scrapyard, something like that. That is not an agricultural fence. It's always barbed wire or electroshock fence. It's not. That's just not a good fencing material, period. Especially for gardens because the light doesn't get through. And also, it just does not look good, period.
Well, and so that's kind of part of the problem is, so our sign ordinance, I'm sorry, we talked about the sign ordinance, our fence ordinance, that's really the only definition it gives me. It then goes on to say, well, if it's see-through, if it's a privacy fence, opaque, et cetera, et cetera. Well, this corrugated sheet metal fence would be a privacy fence, because you can't see through it. And so now it has it can be 3 foot tall in the front yard, 6 foot tall in the backyard, but it doesn't actually say anything about the material. So, if you think about it, logically extending, somebody could get a piece of particle board and staple it to a fence, and our ordinance doesn't seem to indicate that that is not a permitted type of fence material. So unless somebody else has something else to add to that, that's the problem I'm having right now.
I asked the builder to look at it. I had seen it too, and said that is not fencing material. It's for roofs and siding on buildings, and it should never have been a fence material. So I think we really need to clean up that part of the ordinance. But the fact that they didn't pull a permit should be enough to take it down.
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts or comments from anybody online, or Mr. Johnson?
I'll weigh in here. I think if you're going to prohibit those kinds of unaesthetic fence materials, you have to specifically list them in the zoning ordinance. It helps the zoning administrator not have to make so many interpretations, and really goes to community values in terms of, we want typical fence materials that you typically find in a residential area. So you'd have to come up with language that would allow the zoning administrator to not be so ambiguous or vague and have to make interpretations. You need better language in your ordinance to enforce that.
You would think common sense would hold out on this issue.
Oh, my friend.
I know it's gone.
Well, okay, so I have a reasonable idea of how to move forward on this, but I just wanted to let you guys know, if nothing else, if there's nothing we can do about this particular one, we do have to do something about this. This is an issue.
But we should be able to do something about this one. If the permit is not pulled, it's on a corner lot.
Yeah, but
It looks horrible.
you are now playing at the intersection of enforcement and what the ordinance actually says. So that's a different issue, I think.
So if we change the ordinance, does that mean that fence is now grandfathered in?
If the fence is up at the time that the ordinance changes, it probably would be. However, if they violated the fence ordinance and they have to pull a permit, which they did not do, that fence might have to be removed, depending on what the law is at the time that the ordinance is passed.
Okay, Mr. Hall is not here tonight to do our report from the city council representatives, so we'll pass that. Mr. Johnson, anything from you?
Well, I'm just glad to be here. We were able to keep working for the last several months. We considered ourselves essential to our business, and I still do. Every day I wake up, I consider myself essential. So we just kept right on working. Work kind of fell off a little bit, but we're glad to be back in the saddle and coming up to meetings.
Mr. Owens, I would point out we do have a member of the city council here, if you might want to ask her for any comments.
Any updates that you would like to pass along on the Sutherland City Council?
I'm just glad about the progress we're making, and we finally got this marijuana deal settled, and we can go from there. That's it.
All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Mr. Bremer, support for that?
I'll second.
Owens, second. All in favor of adjournment, aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Great, motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
How do you shut it down?
It's long hours these days.
Host.
Oh,
Yeah.
Well, if you need some help on those ordinances, let me know. We've written a lot of non-conforming and fence stuff, so.
Well, see, the problem though is I like writing those ordinances.
I know
That's
you
kind of
do.
the dorky thing I do admit. No, but my actual concern was gonna be about the ordinance that you have, making sure that it's in the correct form that we use.
Yeah, right.
So when you get to a point where you're comfortable with it, I guess send it along to me and I'll just patch it into one of our old ordinances.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna do that, yeah.
And where pre-sale is this one?
And one of our sister communities, I think it was Sparta, they just redid their fence ordinance not that long ago, so we should have a pretty good draft to work off of. But I'm just pissed off at this, the guy who put up the fence, he's always doing shit like that.
Yeah.
He's had the most god-awful ugly fence for the longest time, and he's got his camper basically parked on the road, at all times. Bad situation.
Where's the fence?